How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton M. Christensen, James Allworth, and Karen Dillon. In 2012, Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen published How Will You Measure Your Life? I remember reading this book when it was first released, and I believe the messages are relevant enough to revisit in 2019. The book is divided into 3 sections. Section 1 is about finding happiness in your career. Section 2 is about finding happiness in your relationships, and Section 3 is about staying out of jail. I was intrigued that he included a section on staying out of jail and later realized why. One of his Harvard Business School classmates was former Enron CEO Jeffrey Skilling. But for the purposes of this review, we will only focus on sections 1 and 2. In the prologue, he starts off by discussing how so many of his former business school peers and Rhodes Scholars were unhappy in their personal and professional lives, some 30 years following their graduation from business school. Several people had gone through divorces, and sometimes more than one, or were estranged from family members, and some were in prison. I suppose that even the best and brightest experienced dissatisfaction and unhappiness in their lives. This book is really a spin-off from his Harvard Business School class, Building and Sustaining a Successful Enterprise. In that class, he asks his students to ponder how they can be sure that they will be successful and happy in their careers, that their relationships with their spouse, children, extended family, and close friends will become an enduring source of happiness, and that they live a life of integrity and stay out of prison. Christensen and his co-authors share insights from his classroom discussions and from his life to shed some light on how modern professionals can live a life of balance, integrity, and purpose. If you wish to answer the questions, how will I measure my life? Then please keep watching. The power of a theoretical framework. In true academic style, we will start off with the discussion about theoretical frameworks. Okay, not really, but we will talk about the importance of thinking in terms of theoretical frameworks, which you can apply to your professional and personal lives. Instead of suggesting what to think, a good theory will offer you a framework for how to think about a problem or phenomena. Whether we are aware of it or not, we always bring certain beliefs and philosophical assumptions to our problems. In quantitative research, we can view a theory as a scientific prediction or explanation for what the researcher expects to find. A theory is a set of interrelated constructs or variables, definitions, and propositions that present a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relationships among variables, with the purpose of explaining natural phenomena. Theories can be used to answer the question, why would an independent variable X influence or affect a dependent variable Y? The theory would provide an explanation for this expectation or prediction. The metaphor of a rainbow can help to visualize how a theory operates. Assume that the rainbow bridges the independent and dependent variables in a study. The rainbow ties together the variables and provides an overarching explanation for how and why one would expect the independent variable to explain or predict the dependent variable. A scholarly or academic theory is developed when researchers test a prediction over and over again using that framework. This aspect differentiates academic theories from theories, that term that is used loosely in layman's terms. Many people think that the best way to predict the future is by collecting as much data as possible before making a prediction. This is called an inductive approach to thinking and is accelerating in the form of big data, business intelligence, or business analytics. In contrast, thinking in terms of theories is a deductive way of making a decision. A robust theory is valuable because it can explain or predict what will likely happen even before you experience it. While it's useful to fail and learn from our failures, I do not think that people want to endure 2 or 3 divorces and lose millions of dollars because of ill-conceived decision-making and avoidance of theoretical frameworks. We will discuss several theoretical frameworks and mental models for you to start applying in your life. How can I find happiness in my career? In order to answer this question, you will need to ask what motivates you. What is the difference between deliberate and emergent strategies, and how can I best allocate resources to execute on my plans? What motivates you? 2 theories of motivation. To gain insight on what your priorities are, you first need to understand what motivates you. We will discuss 2 theories of motivation. One will be the incentive or agency theory, and the other will be the 2-factor theory, also known as the motivation theory. 2 economists, Jensen and Meckling, published a paper in 1976 outlining agency theory, which is an important yet controversial theory. Agency theory implies that people's or agents work in accordance to how you reward them, or their self-interest, usually in the form of monetary compensation. This is an economic organizational theory that suggests that individuals aim to maximize utility. One criticism of this theory is that it does not explain why some of the brightest people work for non-profit organizations or charitable organizations. Remember, a theory does not need to explain all situations, but the best ones have broad applications. And money is not always the best way to motivate people. In contrast, the 2-factor theory or motivation theory by Frederick Herzberg acknowledges that true motivation is when people do something because they want to do it. This theory distinguishes between 2 types of factors, namely hygiene factors and motivation factors. A useful way to contextualize this theory is to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Each human is motivated by needs, from the very basic physiological needs, safety needs that have to do with establishing stability, the need for love and belonging, self-esteem needs, and the need for self-actualization. Based on this pyramid, we can fit in hygiene factors and motivation factors. Hygiene factors include things like working conditions, the quality of supervision, salary, status, security, the company, the job itself, company policies and administration, and interpersonal relations. Hygiene factors determines the levels of your dissatisfaction in a job, from low to high. They do not lead to higher levels of motivation, but without them there will be dissatisfaction. In addition to hygiene factors, then, we also have motivation factors. Motivation factors are needed in order to motivate an employee into higher performance. These factors arise from intrinsic forces. Typical motivation factors include achievement, recognition for achievement, responsibilities for tasks, their interest in the job, opportunities for advancements to higher levels, and growth opportunities. I have been in jobs where I've had high hygiene factor levels but low motivation levels. That means I had few complaints, but I was not highly motivated because my typical motivation factors were not met. For example, I was compensated exceptionally well and had great working conditions, but I was not growing or was not challenged by my daily work. In other words, I had low levels of dissatisfaction, but I did not love my work. Christensen applies this theory to explain why many of his former classmates were unhappy despite earning top salaries at banks and consulting companies. Remuneration was never a motivator, but ended up taking their lives as a priority. Christensen stated very astutely that we should always remember that beyond a certain point, hygiene factors such as money, status, compensation, and job security are much more of a byproduct of being happy with the job rather than the cause of it. Deliberate versus emergent strategies. Henry Mintzberg introduced the concept of deliberate and emergent strategies. The best careers and companies balance both of these. When you put in action a plan focused on anticipated opportunities, you are pursuing a deliberate strategy. When you put into action a plan to pursue unanticipated opportunities, you are following an emergent strategy. The authors suggest that it's wise to make plans, but it's also wise to fine-tune your radar for unanticipated opportunities. Because as we know, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. If you work in any corporation, you know only too well how much effort is allocated to business planning. We do not want to believe that our strategies and plans could be ineffective. In practice, deliberate strategies, which are a result of intended strategies, are not always successful, usually because the assumptions built into the plans are flawed. Christensen shared an interesting suggestion for business planning. He suggested that teams should make a list of all of the assumptions that have been made in their initial projections in the order of importance. Then they should ask which of these assumptions need to prove true in order for us to realistically expect that these numbers will materialize. Then, before implementing the plans, they should find ways to test their assumptions. Resource allocation. Resource allocation, capital budgeting, and corporate finance are the responsibility of every employee in the company, regardless of the department that they are in. Resources can include personal time, energy, talent, and wealth. But resources are limited, and varying interests or departments compete for these resources. The question then becomes an economics question. How should we allocate our scarce or limited resources? Christensen and his co-authors suggest that we should allocate our resources based on what our deliberate and emergent strategies are and what are our major priorities. This will require taking inventory of how we spend our time, energy, and money. Your schedule does not lie, and your bank balance also does not lie. So if you say you value family time but spend very little time, then you might not be well aligned with your priorities. Another technique is to make a list of all the projects, people, and obligations that require your time and cash. Yes, physically write it down. Then allocate your time and cash according to the importance, short-term and long-term goals, and needs of your constituents. How can I find happiness in my relationships? You might need to ask yourself what your most important sources of happiness are. Does that include your relationship with your family and friends? Or do you feel happiest when you're achieving new goals in your career? Christensen asserts that intimate, loving, and enduring relationships with our family and close friends will be among the sources of the deepest joy in our lives. Some people trade off spending time with their families for their careers. I'm not one to judge whether that is right or wrong, but Christensen suggests that neglecting personal relationships will eventually take its toll. Think of surgeons who are on call and spend 100-hour weeks in the hospital. They are often living their calling and perhaps do not have as much time to devote to their personal relationships. Christensen himself is drawn to interesting problems and challenges. He can lose himself for hours solving problems, which gives him a short-term high. And he knows that spending his time like that is not consistent with his long-term priorities. So he sets hard boundaries to leave the office at a reasonable hour so that he can attend family commitments. He believes there is a long-term payoff for doing that in the sense of fulfillment and happiness. Relationships require consistent attention and care. Just as you should not outsource the future of your business or your core competencies, you cannot outsource loving your family and friends, because if you neglect these relationships now, you run the risk of losing support when you need it the most. The author, Clayton Christensen, published many other books aside from this one, such as The Innovator's Dilemma, The Innovator's DNA, and The Innovator's Prescription. Shortly after battling cancer, he suffered an ischemic stroke, which resulted in expressive aphasia or Broca's aphasia. Aphasia is an impairment of language that affects the production or comprehension of speech and the ability to read or write. Aphasia is almost always due to injury of the brain, and most commonly from a stroke, particularly in older individuals. The stroke initially impacted his career at Harvard as a professor, author, and academic, but although he did relearn to read, write, and talk, I can imagine how awful it must have been losing his cognitive faculties since he was a professor and an author. This traumatic experience undoubtedly that led him to question purpose and meaning in life. Instead of getting carried away into a downward spiral of despair, he chose to write and help others find their purpose. And I'm glad he did. Final thoughts. This book, How Will You Measure Your Life?, forces one to think about the purpose in life and in business. Illness, relationship breakdown, death, job loss, business attrition can all lead you to question your purpose in life. I think you should think about your purpose in life long before those situations arise. A purpose in life should be deliberately conceived, chosen, and pursued. This is too important to be left to chance. So whether you achieve your purpose will depend on the resources that you allocate and your commitment to them. How you get there is likely to be emergent based on your circumstances, environment, and whatever else is happening simultaneously in the world. And that's the fun part if you choose to see it that way. Many successful professionals invest their resources not just into their work, but into their families and lifestyles. And I think they need both. So have you read this book? This book is a short yet impactful read that will have you reflecting on your life and hopefully thinking in terms of theoretical frameworks. If you like this video, please click the like button, share this video, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the bell icon if you'd like to be notified of new video uploads. I do have an amazing lineup of reviews and summaries of books and literature on my channel planned for you. So remember, leaders are readers and you are a leader.